Hello, I'm Laura Humm. I'm one of the Dialogue Doctor editors, and I am here today with Danielle Bonneau. Did I get it right?
Fantastic.
I was
Yes.
practicing in my head, wanted to make sure I got it right. And Danielle, you are writing some historical fiction.
Yes,
You want
exactly.
to tell us a little bit about yourself and your story?
Yes. I have been a journalist. First, you'll see I have a French accent because I'm from Quebec and from Montreal, actually. And I have been a journalist for 35 years at a major newspaper, La Presse. So I had not really thought of writing actually a novel until 5 years ago when I was totally moved by the movie from Pixar, Coco. And it really, really touched me because the message was that the people that you love, they are still live on. They still live on even after they're dead, as long as you remember them. And that resonated with me because I was thinking, I love my grandmother. And if, I mean, not if, but when my generation passes on, like my kids, they will not know my grandmother. And then I mean, they kind of know a bit, but after that, that's it. I mean, nobody else will remember my grandma. And my mom, same thing, So I said, I did not, I have to kind of, I felt like a responsibility, like we say in French, le devoir de mémoire, which means we have a responsibility to kind of share and kind of, like remember where we come from. And Quebec, we have a very specific history, which I'm very fond of, and I really find it's very important that our kids continue knowing that. And so my grandma, I did not know much about her. And actually, my book is not about my grandma; it's about her grandparents and her parents. But from them, I had actually no barely any knowledge. From what my grandma had told me, her name is called Décarie. Décarie, when you live in Montreal, you know the name because it's a major highway that goes across the city.
Oh.
So right away, it just strikes the imagination. But people don't know that there used to be a farm. Montreal is about the size of Boston, let's say, but so it's not a big city, but I mean, it's amazing how much the city has grown in the last 150 years. But 150 years ago, when my story is set, I mean, I start in 1860. Those were melons that were grown in there, and so I knew that. I knew that the family was like a very important family because of its ties. Like the going all the way to the first settlers. I mean, like the godparents of the first son of the first settler, were the founders of Montreal. And so I knew that, and I knew that my grandmother's parents were like Romeo and Juliet. Their parents could not marry their families were really upset at each other, but I did not know why. So I
Mm.
set up with those tidbits of information, and then it became a passion, and I became really
Mhm.
obsessed with the story, the history of my family members, but also of Montreal. So it's been like a quest.
Mhm. Well, that's wonderful, and I'm sure that your journalistic background helped in all of that research.
Yes, the thing is, it has opened doors for me because I mean, I was able to call anybody. Can I visit your house? Can I do this? I did a lot of interviews, but it also has, like it's a double-edged sword because for 35 years, I have had my emotions in check, you
Right.
know? I mean, I'm always factual. I interview people, but I never, it has to be as close to the truth as it is.
Right.
So that has been my, let's say, because it's just 5 years later, it's my fourth version, and I realized that at the beginning, my problem was that I was too factual, and the historical events and the external causes were guiding, driving the story, and not the characters.
Right.
Because I must say that one thing, because the Descaries were so well known, they commissioned someone to actually do a book, and you have all the Descaries, all the members of the family, for all their weddings, all their baptisms, all their burials, from 1650 until 1910. So, and that's how I could see, oh my God, that woman, she's lost 6 of her 10 kids.
Yeah.
And I have the dates, and I have, so it's been like a very precious, it's been like the backbone of my story. But I've had to learn to say, okay, my main character, who is the like my grandmother's grandmother, she was too nice. She was too perfect from the beginning. So that's why I tried to make her weak and scared at the beginning, and very obedient to what society is expecting.
Thank you for sharing all of that background. As it's funny, because as you're talking, thinking over the chapter that I was reading, I could see kind of the struggle that you were having of creating this character who has an emotional connection, but still is historically accurate to the facts. And what I appreciated about your writing, which is, I think, what draws people to historical fiction, is that it's us putting ourselves in a position in a time where we have all of the knowledge and all of the background, specifically as it relates to medicine in this case, and applying it to people who didn't know any of those things in the past. And what really draws us in is those stories and those connections and those feelings of like you were saying about desperation and hopelessness, and how must it have felt to be a woman back 150 years ago when your only job was to produce children, and then you spend 10 years of your life bearing children and only 4 of them live past the age of 6 or 10, right? Like the
Exactly.
devastation that must feel. And I think that's the connection that I really want to help you pull out of your story. I think you've set it up really, really strongly to be able to have this really deep emotional connection and really like fall in love with these characters. I think some of that journalistic need to tell the story might have been your focus even in these later drafts. So what I want to do today is I want to help you find the real emotional heart of your story and focus on zooming in there. And this, for you as a journalist, might feel a little bit more difficult because this is where the fiction part of historical fiction comes in. This is where you're going to have to rely on your knowledge of people and not your knowledge of facts to be able to really bring in and hone that part of the story. So,
Exactly.
does that sound okay?
Oh yes, yes, yes. Because I know that's the weak link. I know.
You're right on the cusp of it. You found all the right parts to do it. I want to push on the gas a little bit more. So let me go ahead and
Perfect.
share my screen. Um, I don't know why I always have such a hard time sharing the screen. I set it up. I was like, oh, it's going to be so easy. I'm just going to click one button, and now I can't find the button. Okay, screen 1 is here. That's screen 2. This must be screen 3. Sorry, I have to talk through it all. Self-talk. Here we go.
Okay.
All right. Are you getting the 2
Yes.
side-by-sides? Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, great. And are they, is the font big enough? Do I need to zoom in?
No, I think,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So the reason that I have a side-by-side up today is because what I wanted to do is show you kind of the emotional outline of the story so that you can kind of see a side by side of the writing that you had and where I want to explode some of the conversations to really dig into the emotional piece. And sometimes that's easier if you can kind of see them side by side.
Okay.
So where your story starts is kind of, and I love this, this author voice that you have where you start with this reflection from the future looking back, and then you zoom directly into the story as if it's happening almost real time. It's still in past tense, but it's almost real time. So I love that. So this idea that Philo would have, changed the course of her destiny if she had just been able to stay home that day. So what you have here is a woman who is due within the next 2 weeks with her 10th, is it 10th child?
7.
7th child, okay.
In 10 years.
And
So you had the number 10 right. Seventh child in 10 years.
7th child in 10 years, okay. So we know that she's pregnant, though I wasn't sure if you had done this on purpose,
Yes.
that you were kind of like hinting at,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah. Does that
So
work? Does that work?
it could, but I'm not sure you need it. But
Okay.
let's talk through and kind of figure out like where the major point is of the first part of the story, because really what you want to do is you want to capture your audience and you want to hold on to them within the first 3 paragraphs, and you don't want to let them go.
Yeah.
And I love the way that you've started this with this idea that the 6-year-old child, fragile for her age, is sick, right? But she's also worried about her sister-in-law, right? So you've got kind of this balance. So you have Philo touching her daughter's forehead for the 3rd time, and now she reaches a decision. She talks to the housemaid and says, make sure you keep Charlotte away from the drafts. And then the housemaid kind of shrugs that off. In this heat, there's nothing to worry about. And then she goes back to this idea, but still, I want you to be careful. And I think that gives you a very nice starting point for your story. However, it's not quite the emotional gut punch that it could be.
Okay.
So you tell us right up front in this very first sentence that her whole destiny is set by this critical moment. And yet, the only thing that we know is that her daughter's running a low-grade fever. She touched her daughter's forehead for the 3rd time, and then she talks to the housemaid. It works, but now imagine how much more emotional this would be if you give the 6-year-old Charlotte a voice. And Charlotte says, "Mommy, don't leave me."
Oh,
And
yes.
she says, "I know, baby, I know, but Aunt Marie needs mommy right now." And the housemaid says, "She's fine. It's no big deal." And here now, this mother torn between her baby, and we learn in the next chapter that Philo is very careful about children who have fevers because she lost a baby not long ago to the similar trajectory, right? Like, so this emotional moment, it's not just that Charlotte is frail for her age and that Charlotte's starting to show a fever. It's the reminiscent of the fact that if I had done something different with my last baby, did I leave that baby and in somebody else's care? Was I not there? Right? Like all of those emotional things.
The guilt after. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the way that I would suggest doing this is, like I said, give Charlotte a voice. And so this is one of those things where we also have this envisionment of parents and children 150 years ago, where children are to be seen and not heard. So often in historical fiction, we don't give children a voice, or we don't read those children's voices. But I can't imagine being a parent in any culture, in any generation, in any century, and not looking at your child who you know isn't feeling well and telling them that they shouldn't have a voice, right? Like, I think that this is like a cultural thing, but not a like person to person thing.
Yeah.
And your readers are not parents 150 years ago. Your readers are parents
Now.
today.
Yeah.
And so we want to connect to them. We want, anyone who has had a child and has had to be up in the middle of the night with a child when the child has a fever, like you hear fever in a 6-year-old and like your gut just clenches. Let your readers sit in that moment in this time, right? So that's the first part of what you can do. The second part of what you can do is you can really let your reader in on the fact that pregnancy is a terrifying time. So this decision that you made to like make Philo's pregnancy kind of I'll hint at it, but not tell the reader about it, you
Sure.
can absolutely do that. But because it's so crucial to the next scene where we meet Marie, this understanding that like this life is precious and her whole job right now is to protect this baby that she's growing inside of her, even to the extent where maybe the housemaid, instead of the housemaid minimizing the fact that this child is sick and there's nothing to worry about, maybe it's the whole family, it's the whole staff. Everybody like knows the loss of the pain of a child. So it's not just, so maybe the housemaid isn't just worried about Charlotte. Maybe the housemaid is worried about Philo and is like, ma'am, maybe you shouldn't go today. And then Philo has to say, but Marie didn't show up at church. No one's seen or heard from her. And then the housemaid can be like, well, why don't we send one of the servants over to check on her? And then Philo can be like, no, no, Marie is my best friend. We've been here for each other. I owe it to her. And then what that does is it takes all of this that you have in prose
Mm-hmm.
and you bring it to the surface, because now we are in the conversation with Philo and someone else. And this other person can say, but you have to take care of that baby. And Philo says, yes, but Marie just lost another child. I can't imagine. We all know that pain. I have to go and I have to be there for her. And then it can be, well, okay, I've told the staff to clean out the yard. And then she can make a joke of, yes, yes, I can't wait until they don't have to clean up because I can see my feet again, right? Because now this moment, this beautiful moment that you have here, that the employees are cleaning up the yard to protect her from manure, becomes like something that your readers can appreciate. It also does this really interesting thing. You were talking about your family's history and like how large their land was and how prominent their name is. And I think it's really interesting that someone who lives in a home who has employees and housemaids is not immune to things like a 6-year-old being sick. No matter what privilege she has in being able to rely on a team, they still, even all of them together, all of that love, all of that care wasn't enough to protect these children. So I think that takes your story and it really humanizes what people went through, specifically the fact that like people who owned a lot of land and had staff and had the means to take care of their children weren't really in any better off of a position than those who were the employees and were relying on other people, right? Like it You in your letter that you sent to me to go with this, you were talking about the child mortality rate in this time was
Oh, yeah.
astronomical. And I think that's really like a key point to historical fiction, is to help contemporary readers understand what those struggles were. And I think by bringing them to the surface, allowing your characters to talk about them, it allows your readers to like feel the weight of what that was like. So then when they go to tuck their own children in at night, there's this like sense of relief that we can just go to the drugstore and get something like Tylenol or, a pain reliever. And we just have that kind of at our fingertips now. And the beauty of that is when you're making that emotional connection, your readers hold on to your story and want to come back to it. They want to talk about it. And that's like how you generate readership. So,
Very, very, very enlightening. Yes.
okay.
Yes, thank you. Yes,
So you
yes.
found that
And
helpful.
just to tell you that when you talk about, feeling um, lucky in the era we live in, like that, like in the chapter, she gives syrup to her daughter. While later on, when because this was at the really the early stage of childcare. There was like barely, like parents would not call the doctor to come and care for the kids. It's just you cannot do anything for them. And then she will learn that, well, one thing you should never do is give soothing syrup, because it had like it had if you give too much, it would kill the kids, the babies.
Right.
Again, another layer of guilt.
Right. Right. And that's what we want to feel. And I love that you brought in those details of the time, because again, that's the beauty of historical fiction, is you're taking things that most people don't know about medicine 150 years ago, and you're putting it in a story. So you're making learning fun. Nobody wants, not nobody, but a lot of people like, I don't want to learn anything, but if I can learn something while I'm being entertained. So I definitely think that that's the way that you can go with this first chapter, is giving giving Charlotte a voice, giving the housemaid more of a, my job is to help you take care of your home and your family. And I want to care for you the way we all care for all of these children. So kind of bringing it kind of all in. And then
Yeah.
when we go to the next part of the scene, when we're actually in Marie's house, it gives us it gives us a couple of things. It gives us the framework for why Marie is in so much pain. It also gives us this, because what I'm seeing and again, it was just that one little bit of a scene, but in my mind, you've kind of painted this picture of Philo's house of kind of light and airy and busy and lots of people around, and everyone's kind of caring for everyone. But then you get to Marie's house and the shutters are all closed and nobody's cleaning up and there's no one really around to help Marie. And you see this juxtaposition, only because it's like my favorite word in the English language, right? Like this difference between the two households, and how Marie has lost child after child after child, and how that's like brought down the whole house, versus Philo, who has, while she has had many children, not all of them have survived. She has older children that the whole household is coming around to protect. And even in chapter 2, when Charlotte gets very, very sick, all the people who are coming in from the field to check on her and to take care of her, never her father, which I thought was actually a very interesting thing. Um,
He's the
just
mayor.
as a, just as a quick aside, I did notice that. It was the melons, then it was the fire, and then after the fire, it was something else, right? Like he just was never there. Um, so I definitely like see the difference between the two houses, which when we get into that second scene where she's talking to Marie, I think the stark differences in the lightness of Philo's house and the darkness in Marie's house is going to lead you into the emotion that I would like to see in that second scene. So,
Yes.
okay, any questions about scene 1 before I move on to scene 2?
No, I think it's really, really, it touches me a lot. Yeah, I think I see exactly what you mean.
Excellent. Okay. So when we get to Marie's house, again, I loved how in just a couple of lines, I was really able to see how dark and how closed off Marie's house was. And you get Philo upstairs, and the first thing that Marie says is, "I didn't think you'd come." And then Philo kind of snaps back, "It's not easy for me either." And then we see this like paragraph of the pain that Marie has been going through and their background and their history. And then from that moment, Marie comes right out and says, "I have a favor to ask you. I think I'm pregnant. I'm willing to do anything to, you know." And then Philo freezes and her baby kicks. And then it's like she's on the defensive, right? Like she doesn't want to respond. She's just kind of keeps the whole thing at arm's length. And then Marie has this very painful moment where she says that that I will die if I lose another baby. I have no more tears. I think that's so powerful. I also really appreciated the way that you named all of the children that she had lost month after month, year after year. I think that was
And it's their real names
I I
from the
thought that
book.
might be the case as a historian. I thought that might be the case. And knowing that these were real people made that line with Rose and Victor and Agnes and all of the other, like it made that even more impactful. What I wanted to see though is to not rush this conversation. So I think about this idea that I've had this friend, kind of putting myself in Philo's position. I have a sick child at home. I know I have to come visit my friend who has been through everything with me for 15 years, right? All the good times, all the bad times. I've stood by her as she's lost children. She's stood by me as I've lost children. Her marriage, my marriage, all of this. But I am leaving my sick child at home to be here with her. I think the first thing that I would say to her when I walk in is, "How are you?
How are you?
Know,
Yes.
what's
Yes.
happening? Can I, maybe she sees Marie and the puffy face and the hair is like over her eyes, and like all she remembers is Marie being the most beautiful girl in the village. Maybe as she talks to her, maybe she says things, maybe she starts to tidy up and she's like, "When was the last time you ate something? Let me make you a cup of tea," right? Like she wants to take care of her friend whose grief is preventing her from getting out of bed. Maybe she starts brushing her friend's hair, and as she's brushing her hair, they're talking about the one-room schoolhouse, and they're talking about their friendship, and they're talking about the younger years. And maybe the baby kicks, and Philo is so excited about the baby, and she grabs Marie's hand and puts it on her belly so Marie can feel the baby, and that like sets Marie into tears. And then there's an apology of this moment of like, "I just wanted to share this with you. I want you to be part of my baby's life." And then Marie in that moment can just say, "I'm pregnant," right? So if she says, "I think I'm pregnant," and then because you had talked about like towing the line in society, you've got this this line here from Philo, it'll be different this time, right? I
Yeah.
think I'm pregnant. Congratulations. I have no more tears. It'll be different this time. It won't, I know it. I'll help you, I promise, right? Like these moments, right? Like let it be kind of the joyful thing that we all want it to be, the news that we hear when someone's pregnant, but then letting Marie's grief just overwhelm the whole conversation. And you've got this line in here, right? And then Marie can say something along the lines of, I just can't do it. I need a way out. We have to stop this. And then that's where you can get you can't be serious, right? So by turning that, you've got the right emotional components of the scene, but if you turn them around so it doesn't feel as aggressive in this has to stop as the very first thing that comes out, because grief doesn't always come out that boldly. Grief often has layers to it, and we're afraid to say the thing out loud because it's not just Philo who's towing the line now. Marie, whose whole job it is to have babies, but has lost year after year after year. Like, I just can't do this anymore. I don't have it in me. We can work together. I can be with you. No, you don't understand. I can't. I won't. And we can kind of see the desperation. Will
What
you
if,
help me?
yeah, what if I was not going into joyfulness for Philo as being pregnant, as being
Mm,
her seventh in 10 years. She's older, she's 42.
mhm.
She's tired. She almost died the last time. And the thing is, when you go
Ah,
into the history in Quebec, the priests would go and they would knock on the door and they would say, you haven't had a kid now, it's been a year, what's going on? So there was this pressure
mm,
to have babies after babies, and women, I mean, that's why I was saying Philo was maybe not that overjoyed herself of
mhm.
having that, seventh child. And she was, like afraid of losing those kids, and the reason why she got married late was because maybe she did not, it was not like the thing she wanted from when she was young, like because she's
Mhm.
had seen her cousins and everybody else around having, here they had like 18 kids,
Yeah.
uh,
Cool.
so
Can
saying I don't want
imagine.
to have 15, 18 kids. And like my grandfather, he was like the 18th of 22, and always saying 18 of 22, but four died. Always,
Right.
always,
Right.
that's what they were saying. So that's why I was going into that more shady
Yep.
emotion.
So that actually works really great too, because you can actually have it as while Philo is trying to take care of Marie, Marie maybe is saying things like, sit down, you're tired. And she's like, no, it's okay, it's okay. I feel better this time. And Marie's like, but you have to be careful. You felt good this time last time too, right? Like they can, because presumably Marie was with Philo, because
Oh yeah, because
no,
when one was pregnant, the other one was burying hers, and when the other one was pregnant, the other one was burying. They were like follow each
right.
other. It's crazy.
Yeah. So like let them talk to each other about what this pain was and the grief of like, so maybe it's not joy, maybe it's fear. Maybe Marie's scared for Philo and Philo's trying to be brave for all of them, for all of their sake. Maybe Marie asks after the other children, how's Charlotte? How are the boys? And um, you know, Philo hesitates before she says anything, and Marie's like, what is it? Tell me. And she has to say, well, Charlotte's running a fever. And then Marie has to say something like, she's strong. And they both kind of like share a glance because they know she's not, right? Like, let all of that pain and all of that grief that these women have lived year after year after year with, let that come out. Let it be the story that they're telling. This
Yeah.
is probably not the first time they've had a conversation like this. It
Yeah.
probably isn't the last. So maybe even when Marie brings up this idea that she might be pregnant, maybe Philo's not surprised when she says, I have to find a way out of this, right? Like maybe maybe this is something they've talked about in the past. Maybe this is like, maybe when Philo found out that she was pregnant for the 7th time at 42, maybe she's like, this is my last one and I'm going to make sure of it. And Marie is like, yes, no, I am done, is right. Like whatever it is, this isn't the first time these two women have had this conversation.
Yeah.
So rather than us walking away feeling shame for Marie, let us walk away from this conversation with this idea of like, we want to be happy that there's a baby, but babies just bring grief
Yes,
because
exactly.
they, because they just, if they don't kill their mother in birth, right, then they, right, like, so just let us feel the weight of these two women. And maybe the thing that finally gets Marie out of bed is Philo says, I have to get home to Charlotte. And Marie says, I'll be by later. And
Yeah.
she actually gets up and, right. So then Philo feels better about leaving. She's no longer just lying in bed in her grief and her depression. She's not better. Nothing's resolved, but at least they are taking strength in each other
Yeah.
so that when Philo returns home, she has like the weight of what's coming for her, but also the strength in the fact that she has a community who's going to help her through this.
Yeah.
And then that takes your story from a journalistic, life was hard, babies died, pregnancy was difficult, the priests were knocking on the doors, and we're we see the priest in chapter 2 here as well, and he's just so
Cold.
cold. Yes. And like that's not how we necessarily think about clergy now. So to see that and kind of feel like I really want for your readers to take this story from beyond this, things were hard 150 years ago. We kind of know they were hard. We don't have any idea the weight of how hard they were, but we know conceptually things were harder, right? That's the beauty of historical fiction, is that you can bring this out, because after we learn of Philo's story, we get to see one of Philo's children grow up and have a family of his own, and that becomes, right, like, and that's what we want from a story. Like, yes,
Yeah.
there's hardship and there's pain, but out of that pain there's new growth and there's new life and there's beauty in it. So
And that's exactly the message, how I want the book to end on that note, you know? Yeah. When
excellent,
everything
excellent,
was worth worth it in the end, you know? Yeah.
excellent. Okay, so then for the last scene in chapter 1, you have Philo coming home, and Charlotte is outside lying under a tree, not playing with her brothers. And she is so much sicker than she was when she left. So now here is Philo, who is exhausted, 9 months pregnant, can barely stay on her own feet. And her worst nightmare has come true in that her child is sicker than she was. And you have again this, you start to do it here with the child saying, I'm cold. But imagine how much more impactful that is instead of saying, I'm cold, if she barely whispers, mommy, right? Like, what parent hears their name and doesn't just want to swoop in, right? But she's too tired and too pregnant to be able to lift this baby. So who is 6 years old, so she has to have the housemaid come and do it for her, right? And maybe in addition to taking her outside, the housemaid has been making sure that she's drinking a lot of water or something. So it's like, not that she was just outside by herself, but like it's intentional, because what else were they going to do? It was hot in the house. It's a little cooler outside. She thought this was going to be better for her. So then they all kind of work together, bring her to my room, right? And then you've got this, like, your room, like, I'm not allowed. I almost made it, felt it as like the children aren't allowed in there, right? Like society says, like, this isn't right. And you've got it's the best spot in the house right now. Rather than making it be about like this societal thing, it can be, she's the only thing that matters right now, right? Like, so it's not just that it's the best place in the house, it's that I don't care what protocol says, I don't care what society says, I'm not losing another child, we're doing everything we have to do, right? And then you get her upstairs and you talk a little bit about the background and the mother-in-law. And I think this is important, but I don't know that it's as important
At
as,
point, yeah. Yeah,
so
because the thing is, I started at before my previous versions. um, I was like going at length and presenting like how she got courting and marriage, and how her mother-in-law was mean. So that I cut all that up to start at this point in the story when she's like really at one of her worst period of her life. So I thought it was nice at that point to give a feel where they are. But that was my reasoning, you know.
yes, and I think that you can absolutely do that, but punctuate it with conversation. So, mommy, it's okay, baby, I'm going to take care of you, mama's here, whatever kind of language you have them speaking to each other. And she calls Irene, it's Irene,
Yeah,
Irina,
yeah, I
um,
read.
Irene, help me, help me. So Irene picks the child up, and maybe she's holding her hand. Maybe she's holding the little girl's hand as they're walking. It's okay, baby, mommy's going to take care of you. Put her in my room. Your room? Yes, my room. It's the best spot in the house. Your mother-in-law won't like that, right? Irene says, right? Like, helping us to understand why it's such a surprise that you're putting this child in your bedroom, right? So if you have Irene say, your mother-in-law won't like that, she's not here right now, whatever.
She
It's
doesn't live there anymore. She's moved out. I
Oh,
was
okay.
listening like 10 years before when they, but maybe it's not the right timing. Maybe you're right. Or
Um,
she could say, your mother-in-law would never have done that.
right, yes, absolutely. Absolutely, right? Like, they're like, maybe she even panics and stops, and she's like, what are you doing, girl? Keep moving, right? Maybe Charlotte whimpers in her arms in that moment, and um and then maybe Philo says something like, it's freezing in there in the winter, but right now it's going to be perfect because it's not the heat of the summer yet, right? So, and then as they're walking up the stairs, she can remember one of these moments, but it doesn't have to be 4 sentences. It can just kind of be one sentence. And
Okay.
then and then maybe when they actually get into the room and Charlotte gets settled on the bed, Charlotte says, I get to lay in your room, mommy. And Philo, looks around at the spacious bedroom in the extension and looks around and at the bicentennial home and she says, yes, baby, anything for you. Right. Like, so you can still show these moments, but punctuate it with dialogue. So we're understanding the weight of the history, but we're understanding the weight of the history, not because of the history of it, but because what it means to this 6-year-old who has probably never been in her mother's bedroom in her entire life,
Yeah.
right? Like this room has been off limits, which
Yeah.
is why, interestingly, when you bring the brother in later, he's standing on the threshold and he doesn't just come in because he's not allowed in that room,
Yeah.
right? So again, the juxtaposition of what life was like back then and what the rules were, and like, yeah, okay, don't go in mom and dad's bedroom now, just means only go in mom and dad's bedroom when they're home or
And,
when,
and also, it also reinforces how upset she is when the priest comes and he comes in the room,
right,
and then she's like, who dares come into the bedroom, Yeah.
right, exactly. And her brother-in-laws and right, like all of these people, and yet not her husband, right? So, um, and then this part here where she's like looking through the school teacher's handbook, put this in a conversation. So she's getting out her book. Charlotte says, Mommy, what are you reading? And she said something like, when Mommy was a school teacher way back when, they taught us how to care for children like you. And then she says, Irene, go get whatever. And then she's talking and like, there's this, because when your child is sick, you want to talk to them. You want to use a calm voice. You want it to be soothing. You want it to be like, even though inside she's breaking apart because every minute that Charlotte gets sicker, she's thinking about the other child and what the other child went through. So you can have Charlotte say something, her say something back, and then think about the other child. Maybe as Charlotte falls asleep, Philo and Irene are out in the hallway and they're like, maybe Irene says something like, this is just like what happened with the last child. And maybe Philo lashes out at her and is like, I don't ever want to hear you say that again. Get out of my sight, whatever. However she's going to react to that. You know what? Go away, send so and so in. Go find her father, whatever it is, like, because that it's one thing to think it, it's another thing for it to be spoken out loud, right?
Yeah.
Maybe at some point, the boys come by and they stand at the doorway and they ask about Charlotte and she ushers them out and she closes the door and she's like, she's fine. Go get something to eat, go play, go just right. Like, so them standing at the door after Charlotte gets so much sicker isn't the first time, because what we want to see is the weight of Charlotte and what she means to the family. Because right now, Charlotte is isolated with Philo in the back bedroom until like the men come with the elixir and right. Let's have more people come in because everybody knows when a child gets sick, it
Yeah.
could be
Yeah.
nothing or
Yeah.
it could be something really important.
Yes.
So
They're all worried. Yes.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And then as they're putting Charlotte in the bath, Charlotte's like, no, no, and is fighting and kicking. It's not just that she doesn't have enough energy to sit up. She doesn't want to do it. She just wants to lay down. No, mommy, no, no, I just want to sleep. No, stop, right? Like, let me go, let me go. And then she goes limp, right? Like, so then that's why there's water all over the floor. And because right now it's very much as if they're taking care of a doll because you're talking about Charlotte, but Charlotte isn't
Reacting. Yes.
participating.
Yeah.
But 6-year-olds, when they don't feel well, they're kind of whiny and they're kind of loud and they're kind of like, they don't have the words to be able to say what's wrong with them. So they say, I don't feel good. And just lay with me. I don't, right? Like they can't, maybe they bring her some broth and she like spills the bowl and because she like doesn't want it anymore. And like all the things that are annoying and frustrating, but when your kid is sick, it's worse. Let us feel kind of all of those moments so that when we see what happens in chapter 2, and I'm trying, you and I know what happens in chapter 2, but I'm trying to keep it a little bit in case anyone's listening and wants to come back and read, right? Like, let's not tell everybody. But like when that happens, we have such a connection with the whole family
Yeah.
that the devastation that that brings is enough that we're completely in for the rest of your story
Yeah.
because we meet this family who's already been through so much. We fall in love with this child in just one chapter. And now we're like in these people's lives and we want to read the rest of your story.
Oh,
So,
yes, yes, yes. It's so much more emotional. Yes.
yep.
It's a dialogue. It's missing.
So, and you bring up something really important here is that the dialogue helps us see the people's lives and experience the people's lives versus hearing someone else's story through and they moved into the house and this is where their rooms were and this is how they took care of the children and when children got sick I loved this like foot bath with the soap and like because I can see how like the right water temperature can be not too cold because then that could make them more sick but not too hot and that right like all of those little details that you put in here are really really interesting but if you turn them around and make it an emotional moment I'm learning something while I'm experiencing someone else's story and I
Yeah.
think that's really the difference between historical fiction and a history book
Yeah.
is that real person's story in there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. And it has to shine through. Oh, thank you. It's really enlightening. Yes. Yes.
excellent. Do you have any questions for me before we wrap up?
Yes. Do you think that am I starting at the right place? Is it? Is it it?
So having you kind of told me a little bit before we turned the recording on, kind of like where you were in your other drafts and where you started. I love this as your starting point
Perfect.
because it's got the right emotional pull, right? You
Yes.
have a family on the cusp of change that ends up changing in a way that you're not expecting. And I think that's a really powerful way to start a story.
Yeah,
So,
because the previous version I was going through like linear, like chronologically uh, Philo's life, but
mhm,
that's why um, you're so right when you're saying, okay, talk about the life before, but through conversation, remembering, but out
right,
loud,
right.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Especially because often in times of grief, we do look back on those joyful moments in our past and we use those as buoyancy to be like, okay, this is bad, but it was good before, it can be good again.
yeah,
So using those moments instead of starting with the places of fun and joy and like there's so much hope and so much like what could this look like and then bring it down to then bring it back up starting in that place that has the most emotional pull works really well.
perfect.
So
Well, I know you give me so much inspiration. Thank you very much.
excellent, excellent. One more thing that I want to talk briefly about before we wrap up is you had mentioned that you didn't want Philo to be kind of perfect in this.
Yes,
Um,
to be vulnerable and scared, and yes,
yes. So I think that you want to spend a little bit of time thinking about who Philo is, what she has accomplished, and where that has given her strength, and where that is creating that fear and that vulnerability. So in the moments in the first part of the scene, the wishy-washiness of do I stay or do I go isn't about her being indecisive. It's about she has two really important people in her life. She's a strong, powerful, capable woman who is put in an impossible situation. Do I take care of a friend or do I take care of my child? Right? Like, instead of making her kind of weak and like not really knowing where to go and whatever, like bringing her from a place of strength is going to give your readers a better connection to her, so that when she shows weakness with her daughter and she breaks down, we understand it, but we don't think, oh, if she were stronger, she could have taken care of her.
yeah,
Right? Like we want the reader to connect with Philo because the first part of your story is following her. So
yeah,
we need to feel that connection. And we don't blame someone when circumstances are out of their control. But if there's like a weakness or we don't agree, it makes it harder for us to connect with her. It's why in scene 2, when she's talking to Marie, the kind of coldness that was coming across in the scene, the way it was written, felt a little jarring, because it was like, here she is worried about her kid and she gets to her friend's house to take care of her friend, but then she's not doing a very good job of being empathetic to this woman who is, in this terrible place. It made it a little harder to connect to her. And I think things were hard enough for women back then that we don't need 2024 women um, passing judgment on what it was like to make these terrible decisions. So by giving her that kind of strength and power, it also, when you get to the scene where she starts really taking charge and barking orders and saying, go get this and do this, and somebody sends somebody out to find my good for nothing husband who never actually shows up, who ends up sending his brother-in-law with the elixir, or whoever he sends, right? Like, it makes sense to us because when we're looking at a situation of terror, we always want to see the best in ourselves, and we all want to see ourselves kind of step up and take control and do everything we can possibly do. So we want to really see that in your main character. Not to say that she's not vulnerable, and not to say that she's not going to make the wrong decision, but when she gets to that place where someone hands her the elixir, you have a line in there where she's like, ordinarily, I would like to talk this over with my husband. Maybe turn that around and maybe like, he might do something different here, but he's not here. So I have to make this decision. Um,
actually, the fact that he's not there is because I wanted him to really feel guilty, because I have like several point of view. So when he's going to come in afterwards, he really will go and have a moment where he's going to be soul searching and say, well, I was not there. And so that's
Good.
why I pushed it that far.
Good. I liked it. I liked it. It also made me really feel like the huge distinction that you always hear about between the masculine roles and the feminine roles 150 years ago, and how like men didn't take care of the children. It was women's work. And right, like I definitely like it felt very true to the storyline. And then for him to come in at the end of scene 2 and be like, or excuse me, end of chapter 2, and really have to like face his decisions of being, I think that that was a really smart way to play that. But if the plan is for that to be a wedge between them as you move into the later chapters, let us feel the pain from Philo of him not being there so that we can see his pain and him trying to make up for it, and her being like, there's no making up for this.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm projecting into the later part of your story, but that's kind of where it felt like you were leaning as I was kind of reading those like couple of lines, or it was like, he's too busy with his melons and he's too busy with the fire and he's too busy, right? Like he's too busy, he's too busy. So I could kind of, it kind of felt like you were turning that dial of like tension there. So I don't know, maybe I'm projecting.
No, 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 you're right. So
Excellent.
he can go and really feel bad about himself.
Good, good. I mean, and if, I think I think it probably was not an uncommon thing for men to be told, your job isn't to take care of your family emotionally, it's to take care of your family financially. And I imagine that a lot of men felt like they were really missing out because they were told that they're not supposed to really connect and take care of their children that way. And then something like this happens and one of their children gets sick and they're told that they're not supposed to be there. So, I mean, if there wasn't that pain, we wouldn't have seen the shift that we see now where parents are supposed to take care of their children regardless of gender. So,
Exactly.
yeah. So, thank you so much for letting me share your story with you.
Oh, and
I'm
thank you so much. It's like you're giving me like so much. I mean, I just want to start now, go and start again, and add on everything that you mentioned. Thank you so much.
excellent, excellent. Okay, let me turn the recording off. I have to stop sharing first because I don't know how to do it any other way.